This is the Great War Discussion Group. I'm Charlie Van Way, and we'll introduce our speaker for today. Now, as you recognize the quote in 1914 that the lamps are going out in Europe, and we shall not see them again in our lifetime. There is this is a very appropriate quote for Dennis's talk, because Dennis Cross, as you all know, is a longtime volunteer and began doing a monthly blog in 1914 at the beginning of the 2014 at the beginning of the 100-year anniversary of the war, to record everything that happened that month. And he kept this going through 1919, through 2019 for 1919, and has subsequently published this in 3 books, which are available in the bookstore or on Amazon. I think it's a great work of scholarship and makes fascinating reading. I wouldn't try to read the whole thing from beginning to end, however. It's wonderful to be able to go into the account of just what really was going on for each month during the Great War. Dennis's talk this time is about what has been called the July crisis, which is the month before the war actually started, following the assassination of the Archduke at Sarajevo. And without further ado, Dennis, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Charlie, and welcome everybody. And thank you for the plug for my book, my books. And if I repeat some of the things today that you've already read in my books, I apologize in advance. We are all familiar, because I think all of us, maybe at least most of us, have been to the World War I Museum. So I think we're all familiar with the opening lines of the introductory video that's shown to visitors at the National World War I Museum and Memorial. No one can say precisely why it happened, which may be in the end the best explanation for why it did. And we also know how the same video ends, with a scroll through the 30+ days that followed the Archduke's assassination. In this presentation, I'll add some detail to the events of those 30+ days, in the hope that it will add something to our understanding of why it happened, though a definitive answer to that question will always be elusive, if not impossible. When the summer of 1914 began, the world was at peace. International tensions had led France and Germany to the brink of war in 1911, followed that year by an actual shooting war between Italy and the Ottoman Empire, and 2 wars in the Balkans in 1912 and 1913. But those wars were over, and tensions appeared to have lessened, if not entirely disappeared. The resolution of those conflicts, combined with the international cooperation that led to the Hague Convention of 1899 and 1907, gave reason to hope that the economic progress and globalization of the previous century might have the world on the path envisioned by Norman Angell, who argued that the idea that nations had anything to gain from war was no more than a great illusion, a phrase that he used as a title for the book that's on display in the museum. June 28th of 1914 was the last Sunday in June, the height of the holiday season in Europe. Kaiser Wilhelm was aboard his yacht at the annual summer regatta in the Baltic Sea, and his Chancellor, Bethmann Hollweg, was relaxing at his country estate. Both of the Kaiser's top military commanders were on vacation, General Moltke at Carlsbad and Admiral Tirpitz in the Black Forest. Gottlieb von Jagow, the Secretary for Foreign Affairs, was on his honeymoon in Italy. Austria-Hungary's Emperor Franz Joseph was at his summer residence outside Vienna, and his Chancellor, Leopold von Berchtold, was duck hunting in Moravia. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the emperor's nephew and heir apparent, was in Sarajevo, the capital of the recently annexed Austrian province of Bosnia-Herzegovina, on a state visit to observe military maneuvers as a representative of the emperor. It was there in Sarajevo on that Sunday in June of 1914 that the world changed. Returning from a reception at the town hall following a failed assassination attempt on the way there, the Archduke and his wife Sophie, Duchess of Hohenberg, were shot and killed by a Serb assassin, Gavrilo Princip. The timing of the Archduke's visit was unfortunate. June 28th was an important date for Serbs, who made up a significant portion of the Bosnian population. June 28th was, still is, St. Vitus Day, honoring a saint venerated in the Serbian Orthodox Church. And June 28th is also the date on which, in 1389, a Serbian army was defeated at the Battle of Kosovo, a defeat that resulted in the absorption of Serbia into the Ottoman Empire. Patriotic fervor among Serbs was running high in 1914 as the Ottoman Empire was on the retreat, and recent Balkan wars had resulted in significant territorial gains for Serbia, including Kosovo itself. Much of this nationalist feeling took the form of hostility toward Austria-Hungary, whose 1908 annexation of Bosnia-Herzegovina had been bitterly opposed by the Serbs. 6 years later, Serbian nationalists were particularly incensed by what they saw as the deliberately provocative decision to conduct Austrian military exercises in Bosnia-Herzegovina on this anniversary. So anyway, not long after the Archduke's assassination, Austrian authorities satisfied themselves through interrogation of Princip and others arrested in the aftermath of the shooting that the assassins were part of a conspiracy originating in Belgrade. Rather than take immediate action against Serbia, however, the Austrian government cast a wary eye on the Russian Empire. Russia, like Serbia, was a largely Slavic nation and considered itself Serbia's ally and protector. In the opinion of many Serbs, however, Russia had failed to take sufficient action to oppose the 1908 annexation of the largely Serbian province of Bosnia-Herzegovina. So it was under pressure to redeem itself in the eyes of its fellow Slavs. And Austria-Hungary was hesitant to take action against Serbia without considering the danger of a two-front war. Before taking action against Serbia, therefore, the Austrian government decided to find out how much support it could depend on from its own ally, the German Empire. On July 4th, Austrian Foreign Minister Berchtold sent his chief of staff, Count Alexander Hoyos, this guy, to Berlin to deliver two notes in person. One was a memorandum that had been prepared before the assassination, reviewing international threats to Austria-Hungary and its common interests with Germany, with an addendum prepared after the assassination, arguing that good relations with Serbia were no longer possible. The second was a personal note from Emperor Franz Joseph to the Kaiser, asserting that the assassination was the result of a well-organized conspiracy. This is a quote, well-organized conspiracy whose threads extend to Belgrade, close quote, and that there was no longer any possibility of conciliation between Austria-Hungary and Serbia. It concluded that, quote, the policy pursued by all European monarchs of preserving peace will be at risk as long as this hotbed of criminal agitation in Belgrade remains unpunished. In Berlin, close quote. In Berlin on Sunday, July 5th, a week after the assassination, Hoyos gave copies of the notes to Count Laszlo Széchenyi, the Austrian ambassador to Germany. Széchenyi took them to Potsdam and handed them to the Kaiser, who had returned from his Baltic cruise when he learned of the Archduke's assassination. Hoyos stayed in Berlin and met with German Undersecretary of State Arthur Zimmermann. Zimmermann's boss, Secretary of State Jago, was still on his Italian honeymoon. That evening, the Kaiser conferred with Zimmermann, Chancellor Bethmann Hollweg, and senior German military officers. The next morning, the Kaiser got back on his yacht and left for a tour of Scandinavia. That afternoon, Monday, July 6th, Bethmann and Zimmermann met with Hoyos and Széchenyi in Berlin. Bethmann gave Hoyos the German government's formal reply to the Austrian notes and assured him that whatever Austria decided to do, it could be confident that Germany would stand by its side as an ally. This was known, has become known, at least, as Germany's blank check to Austria-Hungary. But it was issued with the understanding that any punitive action against Serbia should be carried out swiftly. There was a problem with that, however. The internal politics and governmental structure of the dual monarchy made swift action impossible. No action could be taken by Austria-Hungary without the concurrence of the Minister-President of Hungary, Count István Tisza. In the immediate aftermath of the Archduke's assassination, Tisza opposed war with Serbia, fearing that annexation of all or part of Serbia would diminish the power of Hungary within the empire. In a meeting of the Joint Ministerial Council on July 7th, it was agreed that there would be no annexation of Serbian territory, and again at Tisza's insistence that any attack on Serbia would be preceded by an ultimatum and response, followed by a declaration of war. All this, of course, would take time. Another factor making swift action impossible was that harvest leave, already underway for troops from rural areas, would not expire until later in the month. Not only were these factors not given full consideration at the time the blank check was issued, there was no attempt to enforce or even discuss them when the time came later for the check to be cashed. On July 10th, in an attempt to satisfy one of Tisza's demands, Berchtold ordered the staff to begin drafting an ultimatum. That evening in Belgrade, Baron Giesel von Gieslingen, pardon me if I get some of these pronunciations wrong, they're a little tricky. Baron Giesel von Gieslingen, the Austro-Hungarian minister to Serbia, returned to his post after an extended stay in Vienna. Nikolai Hartwig, Russia's minister in Belgrade and a longtime advocate of a strong line against Austria-Hungary, took the occasion of Giesel's return to call on him at the Austrian embassy and offer Russia's formal condolences for the death of the Archduke and Duchess. Among other things, Hartwig denied rumors, which were nevertheless later confirmed, that his Russian embassy, alone among all the foreign embassies in Belgrade, had not lowered its flag to half-mast during the memorial service for the Archduke. While he and Giesel were talking, Hartwig collapsed and died from a sudden heart attack. Hartwig had been in poor health and there was no evidence of foul play, but the sudden death of this anti-Austrian diplomat in the Austrian embassy raised suspicions and inflamed the already intense anti-Austrian feeling in both Serbia and Russia. On July 14th, the Austro-Hungarian Council of Ministers ordered that a draft ultimatum be submitted for its approval on July 19th. The Council also decided that the presentation of the ultimatum to Serbia would be delayed until July 23rd, so that it would not coincide with the visit of French President Poincaré and Prime Minister Viviani to St. Petersburg, scheduled for July 20th to 23rd. The Council considered it important to keep its plans secret until the ultimatum was delivered. But despite its efforts, the information leaked out through diplomatic channels. On July 18th, 2 days before the arrival of the French president and prime minister in St. Petersburg, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Sazonov learned of Austria's intentions when he returned from the countryside and read a telegram from Nikolai Shebeko, the Russian ambassador to Austria-Hungary. When he showed the telegram to the Tsar the next day, the Tsar read it and wrote in the margin, "In my opinion, a state should not present any sort of demands to another unless, of course, it is bent on war." On Sunday, July 19th, 3 weeks after the assassination, and almost 2 weeks after Germany had issued the blank check, as the Tsar was reading and annotating the Shebeko telegram in St. Petersburg, the Austrian Ministerial Council met in Vienna to review the draft ultimatum. The draft, which had been prepared and presented by Count Leopold Bechtold, the Austro-Hungarian foreign minister, alleged that the history of the past few years, and particularly the painful events of the 28th of June, have proved the existence of a subversive movement in Serbia, whose object it is to separate certain portions of its territory from the Austro-Hungarian monarchy. And that's a quote in the draft. It further alleged that this movement, quote, which came into being under the very eyes of the Serbian government, has, quote, found expression outside of Serbia in acts of terrorism and a number of attempted assassinations and in murders. Close quote. A number of demands followed, including that Serbia issue an official condemnation of propaganda directed against Austria-Hungary, suppress publications spreading such propaganda, enact measures to prevent smuggling of weapons and explosives across the Serbian frontier, and take actions against individuals implicated in the June 28th conspiracy and other individuals who have taken action and made statements indicating hostility toward the Austro-Hungarian monarchy. Points 5 and 6 of the ultimatum demanded that Austria-Hungary be allowed to participate in the investigation and suppression of subversive movements in Serbia. The Council approved the text as drafted and directed that it be presented to the Serbian government on July 23rd, the day the Franco-Russian summit in St. Petersburg, was scheduled to end. President Poincaré and Prime Minister Viviani of France arrived in St. Petersburg on Monday, July 20th. As noted, the Austrian government's plan to keep the ultimatum secret until after their visit had failed. The leaders of the French and Russian governments, therefore, had an opportunity to consult directly on a common course of action. On July 23rd, while the Tsar was entertaining the French visitors, Foreign Minister Sazonov warned Friedrich Portalis, Germany's ambassador to Russia, that, quote, there must be no talk of an ultimatum, close quote. Sazonov and Poincaré agreed before the French leader's departure that they would send substantially identical messages to Vienna, warning that they would not tolerate humiliation of Serbia. Accordingly, on July 23rd, Sazonov instructed Shebeko to warn the Austrian government against taking, quote, measures incompatible with the dignity of Serbia, close quote. And early in the morning of July 24th at sea, shortly after leaving St. Petersburg, Prime Minister, who was also the Foreign Minister, Viviani, instructed the French ambassador in Vienna that no avenue must be neglected to prevent any action by Austria-Hungary that might be considered a violation of Serbia's sovereignty or her independence. By the time those warnings were received in Vienna, Ambassador Giesel had already delivered the ultimatum in Belgrade. The deadline for a response was 6 p.m. on Saturday, July 25th. On Friday morning, July 24th, the Austro-Hungarian ambassador to Russia, Count Friedrich Sapari, arrived at Foreign Minister Sazanov's office to deliver a copy of the ultimatum his government had sent to Serbia the previous day. Sazonov reviewed the text and told Sapari that Serbia could never agree to allow the participation of Austrian officials in the investigation of the assassination. He angrily accused Austria of setting Europe ablaze and told Sapari that other European nations, particularly France and Great Britain, would also consider Austria's stance to be nothing less than unjustified aggression. He rejected Sapari's argument that Austria-Hungary was acting to vindicate the monarchical principle, saying the monarchical idea has nothing to do with this. After Sapari left, Sazonov called a meeting of the Council of Ministers for that afternoon. At the meeting, the Council approves Sazonov's plan to order a partial mobilization of the military against Austria-Hungary only. That evening, Sazonov received the German ambassador Friedrich Portalis and told him that Russia would not leave Serbia to settle her differences with Austria alone and would consider Austrian aggression against Serbia a reason to make war. Later, he received the French ambassador Maurice Palaiolog, whose picture is here, and reported his conversation with Portalis. He also informed the ambassador of the decisions the Council of Ministers had made earlier that day, including the decision to order partial mobilization against Austria-Hungary. The next day, Saturday, July 25th, the Council of Ministers met again, this time with the Tsar presiding. The Tsar approved Sazonov's partial mobilization plan and authorized the immediate institution of a period preparatory to war. A step just short of mobilization that included enhanced powers for military authorities, recall of reservists, concentration of troops and equipment, mining of harbors, and heightened security at magazines and supply depots. 5 minutes before the July 25th deadline expired, Serbian President Nikola Pasic presented himself at the Austro-Hungarian legation in Belgrade and handed Ambassador Giesel the Serbian response to the ultimatum. While some of the responses were conditional or asked for more information, most of Austria-Hungary's demands were agreed to. Russia's support, however, had emboldened Serbia to resist the most objectionable parts. In response to paragraph 6, the response stated, quote, "The Serbian government considers it its duty as a matter of course to begin an investigation against all those persons who have participated in the outrage of June 28th and who are in its territory. As far as the cooperation in this investigation of specially delegated officials of the Austro-Hungarian government is concerned, this cannot be accepted, as this is a violation of the Constitution and of criminal procedure. Yet in some cases, the result of the investigation might be communicated to the Austro-Hungarian officials," close quote. When Ambassador Giesel received the response and saw that it was not an unconditional acceptance of Austria-Hungary's demands, he handed Pasic a previously drafted letter stating that he and his staff would leave Belgrade that evening. The harsh Austrian ultimatum and Serbia's refusal to acquiesce unconditionally made European governments realize for the first time that a continent-wide war was a distinct possibility. On Sunday, July 26th, the day Russia's period preparatory to war took effect, The German government issued a statement warning other powers not to interfere with Austria's action against Serbia. On the same day, Great Britain's First Lord of the Admiralty, Winston Churchill, ordered the ships of the British First and Second Fleets coming off maneuvers and due to return to peacetime status to remain on alert and concentrated at Portland. With the events of the last few days, the Austrian ultimatum, Serbia's response, and Austria's mobilization, decision time had come. It was time for Austria-Hungary to cash Germany's blank check and or for Germany to either withdraw it or impose conditions. Kaiser Wilhelm, ignoring Chancellor Bethmann Hollweg's advice to remain on his Baltic cruise, returned to Berlin on July 27th. That afternoon, he learned the full extent of the emergency at a meeting with Bethmann Hollweg, Foreign Minister Jago, and Army Chief of Staff von Moltke. Later that evening, after the meeting had adjourned and the Kaiser had retired, events continued to unfold at a rapid pace as word arrived in Berlin of Russia's institution of its period preparatory to war, of Churchill's decision to keep the British fleet concentrated after coming off maneuvers, and most significantly of all, Austria-Hungary's decision to declare war on Serbia the next day. On Tuesday morning, July 28th, the Kaiser read for the first time the full text of Serbia's response to the ultimatum. His first reaction was that the conciliatory reply had removed any cause for war. But it was too late. Before noon that day, Emperor Franz Joseph signed Austria-Hungary's declaration of war against Serbia. The next day, Austrian gunboats in the Danube began bombarding Belgrade, and Minister of War Konrad von Hötzendorf ordered the Austrian army to prepare for a two-front war. As Konrad knew, however, and as both he and Foreign Minister Berchtold had known since the beginning of the crisis, the actual commencement of military operations had to await the return of soldiers from harvest leave. Also on July 29th, Churchill ordered the First Fleet, comprising the bulk of Britain's naval strength, to get underway from Portland and proceed to its war station at Scapa Flow in the Orkneys. The same day, in response to the Austrian declaration of war against Serbia, Tsar Nicholas ordered general mobilization. Early that morning, telegrams sent by the Tsar and Kaiser Wilhelm to each other had crossed paths. Both were in English, and both employed an intimate form of address, addressing each other as Willie and Nicky. The Tsar's message to Wilhelm read, "An ignoble war has been declared to a weak country. The indignation in Russia shared by me is enormous. I feel that very soon I shall be overwhelmed by the pressure brought upon me and be forced to take extreme measures which will lead to war. To try to avoid such a calamity as a European war, I beg you, in the name of our old friendship, to do what you can to stop your allies from going too far." The Kaiser's message to Nicholas warned that, quote, "military measures on the part of Russia which could be looked on by Austria as threatening would precipitate a calamity we both wish to avoid and jeopardize my position as mediator, which I readily accepted on your appeal to my friendship and my help." Later that day, perhaps after reading Wilhelm's message, the Tsar changed his mind and ordered partial mobilization against Austria-Hungary only, telling the Chief of Staff, Nicholas Yanushkevich, "I will not be responsible for a monstrous slaughter." The next day, Thursday, July 30th, under enormous pressure from Minister of War Vladimir Sokolnikov and senior members of the Russian military, joined later in the day by Foreign Minister Sazonov, Tsar Nicholas changed his mind again and ordered general mobilization. After he delivered these new orders to Yanushkevich, Sazonov told him, "Smash your phone." Didn't want to hear anything further. Any more orders, any more changes of mind. The next day, Friday, July 31st, Germany proclaimed a state of imminent danger of war throughout the German Empire and issued an ultimatum to Russia demanding that it cease its mobilization. The next day, in the last of the Willie-Nicky messages, Kaiser Wilhelm told the Tsar that he had authentic news of serious preparations for war by Russia and that the peace of Europe may still be maintained by you if Russia will agree to stop its military measures. Following Germany's ultimatum and war preparations, the neighboring nations of Belgium, Switzerland, and the Netherlands mobilized to protect their frontiers and maintain their neutrality. And in Great Britain, First Lord of the Admiralty Churchill informed the builders of 2 dreadnoughts that were under construction in British shipyards, which were about to be completed and delivered to the Turkish Navy, that the government could not allow Turkey or any other foreign government to take possession of them. While all this was going on, the main focus of the British government and of the British people had been on a very different crisis. There seemed to be no possibility of compromise between the nationalists, allied with the Liberal Party, who supported Irish Home Rule, and the Unionists, allied with the Conservatives, who fiercely opposed it. The importance of the question was underscored on July 18th when King George V intervened on behalf of the monarchy in what until then had been considered a strictly political issue. He canceled his planned review of the fleet and convened a conference at Buckingham Palace on July 20th in an attempt to broker a resolution. The nationalists were led by John Redmond and John Dillon, the Unionists by Andrew Bonar Law and Sir Edward Carson. These are, it says Redmond and Dillon. The conference ended on Friday, July 24th, without agreement. In a meeting held the same day, the British cabinet struggled with a related issue, working to define the borders between a potentially self-governing Ireland and with its own parliament in Dublin, and the Protestant counties in the north that could continue to be ruled by the British Parliament in Westminster. The meeting was about to end in another impasse when Foreign Minister Sir Edward Grey, who had just been handed a copy of the ultimatum Austria had sent to Serbia the day before, began to read it to the cabinet. In his History of the Great War, Churchill described the moment. As the reading proceeded, parishes of Fermanagh and Tyrone faded back into the mists and squalls of Ireland, and a strange light began to fall and grow upon the map of Europe. Across the English Channel, there was other news to distract the French from the crisis in the Balkans. The Paris headlines were dominated by the case of Henriette Caillaux. Madame Caillaux, the second wife of former French premier and leader of the Radical Party, Joseph Caillaux, was on trial for the murder of Gaston Calmette, the editor of the influential daily right-wing newspaper Le Figaro. When Calmette threatened to publish private letters between Madame Caillaux and her husband, written when both of them were married to others, she went to Calmette's office, asked to see him, and when he appeared, shot him 6 times with an automatic pistol. At her trial, she claimed that she had not planned to kill Calmette, only to teach him a lesson, but had been overwhelmed by passion. She told the court, quote, "It is terrible how these revolvers go off when they begin shooting. One can't stop them," close quote. The trial began on July 20th and ended on July 28th, the day Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia. In the courtroom, the verdict was greeted with stunned silence, except after deliberating for less than an hour, the jury returned a verdict of not guilty. In the courtroom, the verdict was greeted with stunned silence, except for a small group of Madame Caillaux's supporters in the back of the room who erupted in cheers. Outside the courthouse, thousands demonstrated in the streets for hours after the verdict, shouting "murderous assassin" and "down with Caillaux." With the conclusion of the Caillaux trial, the French public turned its attention for the first time to the growing international crisis. But before the month was over, France was shocked by another murder. Jean Jaurès, the leader of the French Socialist Party, returned on July 30th from a conference of the Socialist International in Brussels, at which he and Hugo Haas, the leader of the Socialist Party in Germany, along with other European socialist leaders, pledged international solidarity in their opposition to war and resolved that if their countries declared war, they would call general strikes to deprive their governments of the ability to conduct military operations. The day after Jaurès returned to Paris, as he was dining with friends in a Paris cafe, he was shot and killed by a nationalist fanatic with the appropriate name of Raoul Villain. The United States, meanwhile, was also concerned primarily with domestic issues. Since the inauguration of Woodrow Wilson in March 1913, Congress had passed legislation strengthening the antitrust laws and creating the Federal Reserve System, and had adopted 2 amendments to the Constitution, one allowing Congress to impose an income tax and another providing for direct election of senators. But the president was following the European situation with growing concern. Even before the Archduke's assassination, he had sent Colonel House, an unofficial but close advisor, to Europe to consult with European governments about the increasing tensions in Europe. House went first to Germany, where he met with Admiral Tirpitz and other officials and attended Schrippenfest, an annual military festival in Potsdam, where he had a private conversation with the Kaiser. After Paris, where he found it impossible to interest anyone in anything other than the impending trial of Madame Caillaux, he went on to England, where he met with Foreign Minister Grey, Grey's private secretary, Sir William Tyrrell, and the American ambassador, Walter Hines Page. While he was in England, he learned with the rest of the world of the assassination of the Archduke in Sarajevo. But it seemed to be of relatively little concern in Great Britain and even less in the United States. On July 21st, Colonel House departed England for his voyage home. Just before he sailed, Tyrrell caught up with him and delivered a message from Grey, stating that recent developments had left him gravely concerned about the Austro-Serbian situation. Colonel House landed in Boston on July 29th, the day after Austria-Hungary had declared war on Serbia. As a European war appeared increasingly likely in the last week of July, a financial crisis exploded across the world, threatening a collapse of the international banking system. Depositors lined up at banks to withdraw their funds, and holders of paper currency lined up to exchange their notes for gold. On Friday, July 31st, the London Stock Exchange, faced with a flood of sell orders and few, if any, buyers, remained closed for the first time in its history. Other exchanges throughout the world, including the New York Stock Exchange, also closed. Fears of a continent-wide war were realized when Germany's ultimatum to Russia on the last day of July was followed on August 1st by a declaration of war on Russia and an ultimatum demanding that France declare its neutrality. The French cabinet responded by ordering mobilization. That afternoon, a telegram arrived in Berlin from the German ambassador to Great Britain, Prince Max Lichnowsky, advising his government that British Foreign Minister Sir Edward Grey, with whom Lichnowsky was on friendly personal terms, had proposed that if Germany agreed not to attack France, Britain and France would remain neutral in a war between Germany and Russia. The Kaiser ordered Moltke to halt any moves against France, but Moltke strongly objected on the ground that the movement, which was already underway pursuant to the Schlieffen Plan, could not be stopped. The Kaiser told Moltke, "Your illustrious uncle would not have given me such an answer. If I order it, it must be possible." The Kaiser then ordered champagne to celebrate, but his subsequent confirming telegram to King George brought a prompt reply that rejected the proposal as a misunderstanding, and a simultaneous warning from Gray to Lichnowsky that a violation of Belgian neutrality by Germany might cause Britain to intervene. Late that evening, the Kaiser showed Moltke the British telegram correcting the misunderstanding and told him, "Now you can do what you want." The next day, August 2nd, without bothering with a declaration of war or an ultimatum, German troops entered Luxembourg. On August 3rd, Germany severed diplomatic relations with France and issued an ultimatum to Belgium, demanding free passage of its army through that country. Belgium's King Albert, in a personal message to King George, appealed for assistance from Great Britain in defending his country's independence and neutrality. That day, Monday, August 3rd, Sir Edward Grey addressed the House of Commons. He read King Albert's plea for assistance and asked the members to consider whether it would be wise for Britain to abandon its traditional policy of opposing domination of the European continent by a single power. He warned that Britain's moral position would be at risk if it stood by and allowed the subjugation of Belgium and France. Among his concerns was the arrangement between the British and the French to divide naval responsibilities in the event of war, pursuant to which France would concentrate its fleet in the Mediterranean while the Royal Navy would undertake the defense of the English Channel and the Atlantic coast of France. It would be dishonorable, Gray suggested, for Great Britain under these circumstances to fail to come to France's aid in a war with Germany. German troops crossed the Belgian frontier on the morning of August 4th. On the same day, Chancellor Bethmann Hollweg addressed the Reichstag, admitting that Germany's action violated international law, but insisted that necessity knows no law. The Reichstag responded by approving war credits. The vote was unanimous. Even the Social Democratic Party, the largest in the Reichstag, and previously opposed to war, supported the measure. Hugo Haas, the party's leader, who less than a week earlier had declared in Brussels his solidarity with his French counterpart Jean Jaurès in calling for general strikes in the event of war, bowed to pressure from his fellow socialists, declaring that we will not desert our fatherland in its hour of need. The British government responded by issuing an ultimatum to Germany, demanding that it cease its invasion by midnight German time, 11 p.m. in London. As the deadline expired, Sir Edward Grey gazed out the window of the Foreign Ministry at the gas lamps being lit on the street below, and was heard to say, "The lamps are going out all over Europe. We shall not see them lit again in our lifetime." Gray's comment was prophetic as well as poetic. A crisis that began with an assassination in Sarajevo and continued through a month of threats, bluffs, and miscommunications exploded in a few days into a continent-wide European war. Before the year was over, the war had spread across the world as the Ottoman Empire declared war on Great Britain, Japan declared war on Germany, and colonies answered their mother country's call to arms. The United States declared its official neutrality, and President Wilson urged Americans to be neutral in fact as well as in name. most Americans watched the unfolding catastrophe with a mixture of amusement and alarm, as illustrated by this cartoon from the Brooklyn Daily Eagle. But as we were about to learn, neutrality was a goal more easily stated than achieved. And that's the end of my presentation. Please join me with any questions.
If anyone wants to unmute and ask questions, please do so now. I'm stopping the recording so you won't be recorded for posterity.